During the first 2 centuries of the Common Era, Christianity spread steadily across the Roman world. This growth occurred despite periods of persecution, and sometimes because of them, as martyrdom and communal suffering strengthened Christian identity. As the Christian population expanded, however, new challenges emerged from within. These problems were not only external pressures from Roman authorities, but internal disputes over belief, authority, ritual, and leadership. Early Christian writings did not always speak clearly or consistently about the nature of Christ or his relationship to God, and without a centralized structure, disagreements multiplied. Out of this environment arose several influential and controversial movements, including Gnosticism, Donatism, and Arianism, each of which forced the Church to define more precisely what it meant to be Christian. One of the earliest and most widespread challenges to emerging Christian orthodoxy was Gnosticism. Gnostic Christians believed that the material world was fundamentally flawed or corrupt, and that a perfect divine being could not truly inhabit a physical mortal body. For this reason, they rejected the idea, central to later Orthodox Christianity, that Jesus was both fully divine and fully human. Different Gnostic groups explained this contradiction in different ways. Some argued that Jesus had never truly been human at all and had only appeared to possess a physical body. Others claimed that Jesus was a normal human being who had been temporarily filled or touched by divine presence during his ministry. In every case, however, Gnosticism denied the incarnation as Orthodox Christians would later define it and rejected the developing doctrine of the Trinity. Gnostic Christians produced roughly 20 texts offering alternative interpretations of Jesus' life and teachings. These writings circulated widely in early Christian communities, but were eventually rejected by church leaders and excluded from the New Testament. As theological disagreements multiplied, the growing Christian movement also faced serious organizational challenges. By the mid-3rd century, the Church needed clearer leadership and a more unified structure to preserve doctrinal consistency. One of the most important figures in this process was Cyprian of Carthage. Cyprian argued that authority within the Church originated with Jesus, who had entrusted it first to the apostles. The apostles, in turn, had passed this authority down to the chief elders of each Christian community. These leaders became known as bishops. This concept, called Apostolic succession, established bishops as the rightful guardians of doctrine and discipline within their local churches. Over time, this system became more formalized. By the early 4th century, bishops met in councils to resolve major theological disputes and determine orthodox belief. Bishops of the largest and oldest Christian centers, Jerusalem, Alexandria, Antioch, and Rome, gained particular prominence. In the Western Roman Empire, the Bishop of Rome gradually emerged as the most influential figure in these councils, laying the groundwork for what would later become the papacy. While this hierarchical structure did not eliminate theological disagreements or heresies, it gave the Church an institutional framework through which it could define orthodoxy and enforce unity. One of the most serious early disputes addressed within this framework was Donatism. This movement originated in North Africa during the persecution under Emperor Diocletian between 303 and 305 CE. During this persecution, Christians who were arrested were ordered either to offer incense to the emperor's statue or face execution. The Bishop of Carthage instructed his clergy and congregation to comply, arguing that such an act was merely a civic gesture, not a denial of faith. He also claimed that seeking martyrdom deliberately was equivalent to suicide, which was considered a sin. Many Christians rejected this position, contending that any priest who complied had betrayed Christianity and that sacraments performed by such compromised clergy were invalid. The controversy deepened in 311 when a new bishop of Carthage was elected. The faction that demanded absolute purity among clergy lost the election and responded by appointing their own bishop, Donatus. His followers became known as Donatists. Donatus taught that priests who had sinned, specifically by avoiding martyrdom, could not administer valid sacraments, famously declaring that a bad man cannot be a good priest. This position raised an enormous theological problem. If validity depended on moral perfection, how could believers ever be certain that a sacrament was legitimate? The dispute eventually reached Emperor Constantine in 313. Although not yet a Christian, Constantine ruled against the Donatists, affirming the authority of the Catholic Church's bishops. The controversy continued for decades, but the Church ultimately resolved it by developing the doctrine of original sin. According to this teaching, all humans share in Adam's sin and are therefore imperfect. Since no priest is without sin, the effectiveness of the sacraments must depend not on the moral purity of the priest, but on God's grace. This doctrine removed the theological foundation of Donatism and rendered the movement irrelevant. An even broader and more influential controversy arose with Arianism, named after Arius, a priest from Alexandria. Arius argued that only God the Father was eternal, unchanging, and perfect. Because Jesus had been born, suffered, and died, Arius concluded that he could not be eternal or fully divine. Instead, Arius taught that Jesus was a created being, superior to humanity but subordinate to God, and served as a mediator between God and humans. This teaching directly contradicted the emerging Orthodox doctrine of the Trinity. In response, mainstream Christian leaders insisted that Christ had always existed alongside God, and that the Incarnation was a unique miracle-fulfilling ancient prophecy. They affirmed that Jesus was fully divine, not a created being. Despite official opposition, Arianism gained widespread popularity, especially in the eastern parts of the empire. It proved particularly influential among missionaries, who converted several Germanic and Slavic tribes to Arian Christianity. This divergence would have lasting political and religious consequences when these tribes later conquered large portions of the Western Roman Empire. Together, these controversies forced Christianity to define its beliefs, establish authority, and articulate doctrine more clearly. In confronting internal conflict, the early Church transformed from a loose network of communities into a structured institution with a unified theological identity.